The first time Auren Thorne saw blood, it wasn't her own. It belonged to the Alpha King who stormed her binding ceremony with fangs bared and eyes blazing like twin flames in the night. She'd been promised to another, a beta heir with gentle hands and calculated ambitions. A safe choice. A political match. But fate, it seemed, had other plans scripted in crimson. Her white gown caught the dying sunlight as Alpha King Kalen Varak's massive shadow fell across the ceremonial field. Behind him, warriors with battle-marked faces formed a wall of muscle and menace, their presence silencing the confused murmurs of her family's pack. And just like that, everything changed. "The ceremony ends," Kalen announced, his voice a rumble that seemed to vibrate through the earth beneath her feet. "This female belongs to me." Auren's father stepped forward, his beta status evident in the slight tremor of his hands. "My king, there must be some mistake. The alliance has been arranged for months." "There is no mistake." Blood dripped from Kalen's knuckles, evidence of whatever violence had delayed him. His gaze never left Auren's face, those amber eyes burning with something primal that made her wolf stir uneasily. "My wolf has chosen." Before she could process what was happening, the ceremony field erupted into chaos. Her intended mate's family shouted accusations of betrayal while her own pack fell to their knees in submission before their king. Her mother wept silently, not from sorrow but from relief, their disgraced bloodline suddenly elevated beyond imagination. No matter how hard she tried, Auren couldn't look away from the Alpha King's face. There was something in his expression beyond mere possession, a hunger, yes, but also something that resembled surprise. As if he himself hadn't expected this turn of events. "You don't even know me," she whispered, finding her voice at last. The king's lips curved into something too sharp to be called a smile. "I know enough." He extended a blood-stained hand toward her. "Come. Your life in this pack ends today." Truth be told, Auren had never belonged here. Not fully. The daughter of a disgraced beta and an omega mother, her bloodline was considered thin, diluted. For years, she'd endured the whispers, the sidelong glances. Her wolf had remained stubbornly silent during her adolescence, emerging late and subdued, as if reluctant to join a world that had already decided her worth. What's worse, her father had traded on her marriageability like currency, using her to repair their family's standing. "This alliance will restore us," he told her that morning, adjusting the ceremonial furs around her shoulders with uncharacteristic gentleness. "Your sacrifice saves us all." Yet here stood the Alpha King himself, claiming her for reasons she couldn't begin to understand. Fear coiled in her stomach like a serpent, cold and heavy. But beneath that fear flickered something else, a strange, reluctant curiosity. What had he seen in her that no one else had? Without warning, Kalen closed the distance between them. His scent hit her first, pine and smoke in male dominance so potent her knees nearly buckled. Then his hand wrapped around her wrist, the heat of his skin burning through the delicate lace of her sleeve. "The next time you speak to me," he growled, low enough that only she could hear, "you will address me properly. I am your king. And soon, your mate." Her wolf, normally so quiet, suddenly surged forward, pressing against the boundaries of her human form. Not in submission, but in confusion. Something wasn't right. Something didn't fit. As if summoned by some invisible force, her gaze shifted beyond the king's shoulder to the line of warriors behind him. That's when she saw him. Standing slightly apart from the others, his face half hidden in shadow. The king's brother, she knew this instinctively, though they looked nothing alike. Where Kalen was all gold and fire, this wolf was midnight and steel. His eyes met hers across the space, and the air between them cracked with electric recognition. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart skipped as something inside her shifted, her wolf howling in recognition at a soul that called to her own. The sensation was so overwhelming that she swayed on her feet. With a single glance, the world narrowed to just him. A warrior with eyes like winter ice and a face carved from stone. Prince Dax Verac, though she didn't yet know his name. For one breathless moment, time suspended between them. Then the king's grip tightened, reclaiming her attention. "You're mine now," he said, his voice heavy with finality. "My wolf has recognized you as my mate." But her wolf knew different. In the space between one breath and the next, a terrible truth unfurled inside her. The bond that was supposed to form with the king remained dormant. Instead, her wolf strained toward the silent warrior who watched her with a gaze that burned colder than flame. From there, everything happened with brutal efficiency. The ceremonial bonds around her wrists were cut. Her father bowed deeply, offering no resistance as his daughter was claimed. The beta she'd been promised was silenced with a single look from the king. Moments later, she found herself lifted onto the king's massive stallion, her ceremonial dress torn at the hem. As the horse turned toward the forest path, she caught one last glimpse of the warrior prince. His expression remained unreadable, but something in his stance spoke of leashed violence, of hands clenched so tightly the knuckles must have been white. As the royal caravan moved away from all she'd ever known, Auren felt strangely separate from herself, as if watching this abduction from above. The forest loomed dark and ancient around them, swallowing the last rays of sunlight. "You will be queen," Kaelin said against her hair, his chest a solid wall of heat against her back. "My Luna. The mother of my heirs." Yet despite his certainty, despite the power of his arms around her, Auren's wolf remained eerily silent. No spark of recognition. No submissive yielding. Nothing like the stories she'd heard of true mates finding each other. Instead, her thoughts kept returning to that single, electric moment when her eyes had met those of the warrior prince. Her body moved on instinct, turning slightly to glance behind them, searching the shadows for a glimpse of him. Deep down, she knew the truth. Her wolf had recognized someone in that clearing, but it wasn't the king who now claimed her as his mate. It was his brother. As the darkness of the royal forest enveloped them, Auren wondered if she was the first female whose wolf had chosen wrong. Because if the stories were true, if wolves never made mistakes in recognizing their mates, then she was being taken to the wrong brother. And somewhere behind them, riding in silence through the gathering dusk, the right one followed. She felt him before she saw him, a presence that made her skin prickle with awareness even through stone walls. Auren stood frozen on the palace balcony, her borrowed nightgown billowing around her legs like smoke as the night air carried his scent to her. Not the Alpha King who'd claimed her that morning, but the other one. The one whose eyes had ignited something forbidden inside her. Prince Dax Verac emerged from the shadows of the royal garden below, moonlight turning his dark hair silver at the edges. Between one heartbeat and the next, their gazes locked, his winter blue eyes finding hers unerringly in the darkness, as if he'd known exactly where she would be. As if he'd been drawn there by the same inexplicable pull that now made her fingers tighten on the stone railing until her knuckles ached. As the silence stretched between them, Auren forgot how to breathe. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, pressing forward with an urgency that frightened her. Even from this distance, she could see the muscle in his jaw tighten, his broad shoulders go rigid with tension. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The air between them vibrated with unspoken recognition. And then, like a shadow melting into deeper darkness, he was gone. But the imprint of his gaze remained, burning through her blood like wildfire. "I see you've discovered the view." The voice behind her made Auren startle, her heart hammering against her ribs. She turned to find a willowy female watching her with shrewd eyes. "Beautiful, isn't it? Though I imagine it's quite different from what you're used to." "Who are you?" Auren asked, her voice steadier than she felt. After being delivered to the palace, she'd been abandoned to a swarm of servants who'd bathed, dressed, and left her in this opulent chamber without explanation. The female's lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I am Sarah, the king's advisor." I've come to prepare you for tonight. In the span of a breath, cold dread pooled in Auren's stomach. Tonight? Your formal introduction to court, of course. Sarah moved to a massive wardrobe carved with wolf emblems. The Alpha King has claimed you publicly. Now you must be presented to the royal pack. Under the weight of Sarah's stare, Auren felt suddenly small. The reality of her situation crashed over her like an icy wave. She'd been stolen from everything familiar, her home, her family, her future, by a king whose wolf claimed to recognize her as mate. Yet her own wolf remained silent toward him, while howling for another. Sarah pulled out a gown of midnight blue, adorned with silver thread that caught the light like scattered stars. The king requested this specifically. He wants the court to see you as he does. Without thinking, Auren blurted, "And how is that?" The advisor's eyes narrowed fractionally. As his salvation. Before she could question what that meant, servants flooded the room. Hands tugged at her nightgown, brushed her hair, applied scented oils to her skin. Auren endured it all in numb silence, her thoughts spinning. The king needed salvation? From what? Meanwhile, her wolf remained restless, pacing the boundaries of her consciousness, seeking something, someone else. What followed was a blur of corridors and whispered instructions. Walk 2 steps behind. Keep your eyes lowered. Speak only when spoken to. By the time they reached the massive doors of the throne room, Auren's heart threatened to beat out of her chest. Remember, Sarah whispered, you belong to the king now. Whatever life you had before, whatever dreams, they no longer exist. The doors swung open. A sea of faces turned toward her, eyes glittering with curiosity and judgment. At the far end of the vast hall, seated on a throne carved from ancient wood and adorned with the skulls of conquered alphas, waited King Kaelin. Her stomach dropped. Standing at his right hand, expression carved from stone, was Prince Dax. The air thickened around her as she moved forward on trembling legs. Every step felt heavier than the last, carrying her toward a future she'd never imagined. The royal brothers watched her approach, one with possessive heat, the other with carefully masked intensity that nonetheless called to something primal inside her. The tension broke when she stumbled slightly on the hem of her gown. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd, but before embarrassment could fully blossom, strong fingers caught her elbow, steadying her. She looked up into Dax's face, so close now she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. As her name left his lips in a barely audible whisper, electricity shot through her veins. Careful, was all he said, but the single word carried layers of meaning that made her wolf surge forward in recognition. Their contact lasted mere seconds before he released her, stepping back into his place beside the throne. But the damage was done. Her skin burned where he touched her, and worse, far worse, she saw in the sudden narrowing of the king's gaze that he had noticed. With every step she took toward the throne, one certainty settled in her bones: she was in danger. Not from physical harm, perhaps, but from something far more devastating. Because her wolf had already made its choice, and it wasn't the male who now beckoned her forward with rings glinting on his powerful hands. Come, little one, Kaelin said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent hall. Let them see the future queen of Verac. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, Auren forced herself to approach the Alpha King. His amber eyes burned with triumph as she sank into a curtsy before him. His massive hand lifted her chin, tilting her face for all to see. Behold, he announced, Auren Thorne, daughter of Beta Thorne of the Eastern Territories. My wolf has chosen. The mate bond has spoken. Except it hadn't. Not for her. Not with him. Her gaze, traitorously, slid to Dax, who stood rigid beside the throne, his face a mask of control betrayed only by the white-knuckled grip on the ceremonial sword at his hip. The crowd erupted in cheers, but something in the enthusiasm rang hollow to Auren's ears. She caught fragments of whispered conversations beneath the applause. Another failed attempt. Bond won't take, just like the others. Desperate move. The king's grip on her hand tightened painfully, as if he too heard the doubts. Tonight, he murmured for her ears alone, you will dine at my table. Tomorrow, your education begins. Education? She echoed, finding her voice at last. Something darkened in Kaelin's gaze. You must learn what it means to be Luna of the Veyrak pack. What it means to be mine. Even so, as the formal presentation ended and she was guided to a seat beside the king's throne, Auren couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. Not by the curious courtiers, but by the silent warrior who had taken up position behind the royal dais, his presence a tangible weight against her awareness. That night, as an endless parade of nobles approached to pay respects to their king and his chosen mate, Auren felt the walls of her new reality closing in. She'd been thrust into a world of power plays and ancient traditions she didn't understand, claimed by a king whose touch left her cold, while every accidental glance from his brother sent heat coursing through her veins. Halfway through the evening, when the wine flowed freely and attention had shifted to entertainers in the center of the hall, she felt someone approach from behind. Her wolf surged forward, recognizing his scent before she consciously registered it. Prince Dax leaned down, his breath warm against her ear. Meet me in the West Garden at midnight, he whispered, his voice low and urgent. There are things you must know. Without waiting for her response, he melted back into the crowd, leaving Auren's heart racing and her mind in turmoil. Whatever fragile safety she'd found in this strange new world had just shattered completely. Because deep down, she knew the truth. One brother had stolen her body, but the other already possessed her soul. The wind carried his name through her thoughts as she watched him disappear among the revelers. Dax. Her wolf pressed forward, desperate to follow. As though fate whispered in her ear, Auren understood with sudden clarity that whatever choice she made tonight would set in motion events beyond her control. To meet him would be betrayal of the king who claimed her. To ignore the call would be betrayal of something deeper, the truth her wolf already knew. Her bones remembered him, though they'd never touched before today. Her soul answered his, though they'd exchanged barely a word. Under the weight of the king's stare, Auren sipped her wine and made her decision. When midnight came, she would seek the West Garden, and whatever dangerous truths awaited her there. His touch burned like ice against her skin, fingers circling her wrist with gentle pressure that belied the dangerous fury in his eyes. In the midnight shadows of the West Garden, Prince Dax Veyrak was nothing like the stoic warrior who stood sentinel beside his brother's throne. Here, with moonlight silvering his features and no witnesses but the ancient trees, he was raw power barely contained in mortal form. You shouldn't have come, he growled, even as his grip tightened possessively. The king has eyes everywhere. And yet he'd asked her to meet him. And yet she'd risked everything to answer that call. Auren stood her ground, pulse racing beneath his fingertips, the silk of her borrowed nightgown whispering against her skin as a night breeze swept through the garden. Then why summon me here? She challenged, her voice steadier than she felt. To warn me away from yourself? The moment their eyes locked, something cracked between them. Dax's expression transformed from stone to anguish so quickly it stole her breath. Because I need to know if I'm going mad, he whispered hoarsely. Tell me you feel nothing when I'm near, and I'll never approach you again. Before she could process his words, a growl rose in her throat, her wolf surging forward with such force that her eyes flashed gold in the darkness. His answering growl was immediate, primal, their wolves recognizing each other across the impossible divide of their circumstances. As the echo faded, they stood frozen in the revelation of what could no longer be denied. The bond that should have formed with the king blazed instead between Auren and his brother, forbidden, impossible, and undeniable. Why didn't you tell him? She asked, her voice barely audible over the thundering of her heart. When he claimed me, why didn't you speak? Dax's laugh was bitter as nightshade. And say what? That my wolf recognized you the moment you entered the clearing? That every instinct I possessed screamed that you were mine? His fingers slid from her wrist to entwine with hers, the contact sending sparks of electricity up her arm. He is not just my brother, he is my king. And a king's word is law. What's worse, his loyalty went deeper than mere obligation. As Dax guided her to a stone bench nestled among moonflowers that perfumed the night air, he revealed fragments of their shared past, how Kaelin had raised him after their parents' deaths, protected him during territory wars, and chosen him as his most trusted commander despite court opposition. He's searched for his true mate for decades, Dax explained, his voice low and urgent. The prophecy states that only when the Alpha King finds his Luna will the Verac bloodline be secure. Without a mate bond, the kingdom fractures upon his death. The weight of his words settled over her like a shroud. And the whispers at court? About failed attempts? Shadows danced between them as Dax's expression darkened. You're not the first female he's claimed. But the others. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. The bond never formed. Eventually, they were sent away. Some didn't survive the separation after being marked. Her blood ran cold. And you think I won't either? I think, he said with quiet intensity, that this time is different. My wolf recognized you before he ever laid eyes on you. I felt it, like being struck by lightning. His hand hovered near her cheek, not quite touching. I'd tracked your scent for miles before we reached the ceremony. The implications staggered her. As though fate whispered warnings in her ear, Auren understood suddenly why her wolf had remained silent around Kaelin while howling for his brother. The true mate bond had formed with Dax, not the king, a truth that could destroy them all. Yet if that were true, why had Kaelin claimed her? Why insist the bond existed when it clearly didn't? Without warning, Dax pulled a dagger from his belt, its blade gleaming in the moonlight. Auren's body moved on instinct, tensing to flee, but his next action froze her in place. He dragged the blade across his palm, blood welling dark and rich. Give me your hand, he commanded softly. Her wolf pressed forward with such urgency that Auren offered her palm without hesitation. The knife's edge stung as it sliced her skin, but the pain was nothing compared to the jolt that shot through her when Dax pressed their bleeding palms together. The forest held its breath as their blood mingled. Then, like wildfire catching in dry brush, heat exploded between them. Their wolves howled in unison, not audibly, but in the secret language of soul recognizing soul. Visions flashed behind Auren's eyes, running together through moonlit forests, bodies entwined beneath furs, cubs with Dax's ice-blue eyes. When her vision cleared, she found him watching her with an expression of wonder and despair. Now you know, he whispered. Now we both know. The truth unraveled between them, they were true mates, bound by the oldest magic of their kind. A bond that couldn't be denied or broken, except by death. By the time their bleeding palms separated, Auren's world had tilted on its axis. Whatever future she'd imagined upon being claimed by the king now lay in ashes. Because her wolf had chosen, and it had chosen the warrior prince who now watched her with equal parts longing and regret. The king will feel it, she realized aloud, panic rising in her throat. If you and I have formed the true bond, he'll know I'm not responding to him. Dax shook his head. Kaelin's wolf is damaged. Years of war and loss have dulled his instincts. He feels something with you, but it's not the true bond. It can't be. Then what does he feel? Hope, Dax said simply. For the first time in years. With every step he took closer, Auren felt the space between them burn with possibility and danger. Her chest ached with the effort of restraining her wolf, which strained toward him with desperate need. Tomorrow he begins your training as Luna, Dax continued, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. He'll try to forge the bond through proximity and ritual. When that fails, He'll what? She pressed when he fell silent. Before Dax could answer, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond the garden. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, instinctive fear made Auren reach for him. Their fingers brushed, sending another shock of recognition through her blood. Go, he urged, already retreating into shadows. Return to your chambers. We can't be discovered together. Yet as she turned to flee, Dax caught her wrist one final time. The moment their eyes locked, something inside her shifted. In the quiet that followed, he pressed his lips to her palm where he'd cut her, sealing their secret pact with a kiss that burned more fiercely than the blade had. No matter what happens, he vowed, his voice a rough whisper against her skin, I will find a way for us to be together. Even if I have to tear this kingdom apart. As she slipped through the palace corridors, heart racing and palms still tingling from his touch, Auren felt the enormity of what had transpired. They hadn't just confirmed the mate bond, they'd completed it. Somewhere in her soul, a tether now stretched between her and Dax, a connection nothing could sever. But as the mark Kaelin had placed on her neck throbbed with dull heat, she understood the terrible truth. She bore one brother's mark while carrying another's bond. The contradiction would eventually tear her apart, or ignite a war that would consume them all. With his scent in the air, Auren reached her chambers just as dawn's first light breached the horizon. She closed the door and leaned against it, trembling with the weight of impossible choices. Her wolf pressed forward, already yearning to return to Dax, while the Alpha King's mark pulsed insistently at her throat. She was caught between duty and desire, between the male who claimed her and the one who truly owned her soul. One path led to security and power but spiritual emptiness. The other promised completion but at the cost of betrayal, exile, or worse. Time stood still as Auren gazed out her window toward the west garden, now bathed in pale morning light. Somewhere beyond those trees, Prince Dax prepared to stand beside his brother again, to maintain the facade of loyalty while his wolf howled for what belonged to him. Her name hung in the air between them still, though mountains of impossibility now stood in their way. In the stillness that followed this revelation, one certainty emerged: the game of survival at court had just become infinitely more dangerous. Because she'd been stolen by the Alpha King, but her soul had been claimed by his brother. He knows. The word sliced through the air like a blade, shattering the fragile peace of dawn. Sarah stood in the doorway of Auren's chambers, her normally composed features twisted with urgency. The king knows you've been with his brother. Blood rushed from Auren's face as she clutched the silken sheets to her chest. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying every moment in the garden with Dax, the blood ritual, the visions, the promises whispered against her skin. Now, mere hours later, discovery. How? The question escaped her lips before she could stop it, damning in its lack of denial. Sarah moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. Your scents mingled. The palace wolves reported it to him at first light. Her eyes, sharp with intelligence, studied Auren's face. But more than that, the mark he placed on you has faded. It shouldn't be possible, not unless a stronger bond had superseded it. The blood exchange with Dax had done more than confirm their connection, it had begun to erase Kaelin's claim on her. Auren's fingers flew to her neck, feeling the once burning mark now cool to the touch. What happens now? She asked, voice steady despite the terror clawing at her throat. Rather than answering, Sarah reached into her robes and withdrew a small vial filled with liquid as dark as midnight. Drink this, she commanded, pressing it into Auren's palm. It will temporarily strengthen the king's mark. Without it, his rage will consume you both. Between one breath and the next, understanding dawned. You're helping me. Why? Sarah's laugh was brittle as frost-covered leaves. I've served this court for decades. I've watched 3 females before you die when their bond with the king failed. I won't watch it happen again, especially not when a true bond exists elsewhere. She gestured impatiently at the vial. Now drink, before he summons you. As the bitter liquid burned down her throat, Auren felt the king's mark flare to life again, hot and insistent. Her wolf howled in protest, fighting against the artificial connection. The pain dropped her to her knees, vision blurring as two bonds warred within her body. Get dressed, Sarah ordered, already moving toward the wardrobe. The king awaits you in the sacred moon room. Your education begins now. What followed was a blur of motion as servants appeared, clothing her in formal white robes embroidered with ancient symbols. Silver chains draped across her shoulders and waist, weighting her down like shackles. Her hair was braided with ceremonial beads that chimed with every movement, announcing her presence. Before she could move toward the door, Sarah grasped her wrist, eyes burning with intensity. Listen carefully. The king believes the bond hasn't formed because you lack knowledge of our ways. He intends to perform the first moon ritual, a ceremony that forces compatibility between mates. Can it work? Auren asked, dread pooling in her stomach. Something like pity flashed across Sarah's features. It has never worked on a wolf already bonded to another. But that won't stop him from trying. As the silence stretched between them, Auren gathered her courage. And Dax? What happens to him? The prince has been sent to the northern border. The king claims rebel packs are gathering, though I've heard no such reports. Sarah's expression darkened. It's exile disguised as duty. He won't return until your binding to the king is complete. The walls seemed to close in around her. Dax gone. The king waiting. A ritual that would attempt to force her wolf to accept a male it had already rejected. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, rage and despair mingling into something dangerous. Yet despite that, a terrible plan began forming in Auren's mind. She was not some passive pawn to be moved across the board of royal politics. Perhaps there was a way to use this education to her advantage, to learn the secrets of this court while hiding her true bond. Take me to him, she said, straightening her spine. Sarah studied her for a long moment before nodding. Remember, reveal nothing of your heart. The king may be blinded by need, but he is not a fool. The journey through the palace corridors felt like a march to execution. Guards flanked them, their expressions carefully blank. Courtiers they passed fell silent, watching Auren with a mixture of curiosity and what she now recognized as pity. They expected her to fail, to fade, to die, just like the others before her. The air thickened as they approached a massive door carved with phases of the moon. Two priestesses in silver robes guarded the entrance, their eyes glowing amber with wolf sight even in human form. They sniffed the air as Auren approached, their expressions unreadable. She carries 2 scents, one murmured to the other. The potion will fade, her companion replied. Then we will see the truth. Without warning, the doors swung open, revealing a circular chamber bathed in unnatural light. Moonlight, somehow captured and held, pooled on the stone floor despite the morning hour outside. And there, in the center of the illuminated circle, stood Alpha King Kalen Veyrak. Gone was the battle-hardened warrior who had claimed her at the ceremony. In his place stood something older, more primal, a wolf king of ancient days, bare-chested and adorned with ritual markings that crawled across his skin like living shadows. His amber eyes glowed with power that made the air around him shimmer. Come to me, little Luna, he commanded, voice echoing with authority that pressed against her like a physical force. Her body moved on instinct, stepping into the circle of light. The moment she crossed the threshold, the doors sealed behind her with an ominous thud. The priestesses and Sarah remained outside, leaving her alone with the king and whatever ancient magic filled this sacred space. Your resistance ends today, Kalen said, circling her slowly. His fingers traced the mark on her neck, making it flare with artificial heat. Your wolf will accept mine, or you will not leave this room. As though the forest watched through unseen eyes, Auren felt an oppressive weight descend upon her. This was no mere chamber but a place of old magic, where the barriers between human and wolf blurred dangerously. In fact, as Kaelin began chanting in the ancient tongue of first wolves, Auren felt her wolf press forward, not in submission but in defensive rage. The potion Sarah had given her might mask her bond with Dax temporarily, but it couldn't force her wolf to accept another mate. What the king didn't understand, what perhaps no one fully grasped, was that Auren's wolf had always been different. Born of an alpha father and omega mother, her wolf carried both bloodlines, both strengths. The submissive silence others had mistaken for weakness was actually the patient waiting of a predator choosing its moment. Her thoughts spun wildly as Kaelin placed his hands on either side of her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You will submit," he growled, his wolf pressing against the boundaries of his human form. "You will accept the bond." A beat later, pain shot through her as he attempted to force the connection, to override her wolf's resistance through sheer dominance. Auren's knees buckled, a cry escaping her lips as the artificial mark burned like heated metal against her skin. With his scent in the air surrounding her, memories surged unbidden, not of Kaelin, but of Dax. The gentle press of his lips against her bleeding palm. The way his eyes had softened when their blood mingled. The visions they'd shared of a future together. Her chest ached with his absence, the distance between them a physical pain that intensified as Kaelin's forced connection attempted to take root. Two bonds could not exist simultaneously, one would have to break. As the king's chanting reached a crescendo, the moonlight intensified, swirling around them like liquid silver. Her wolf pressed forward with such force that Auren felt her eyes change, claws extending from her fingertips. Not in submission, but in challenge. "Something's wrong," Kaelin growled, sensing her resistance. "Your wolf should be yielding." Instead of answering, Auren fought to remain conscious as the conflicting magics tore through her. The mark Dax had placed through their blood ritual burned from within, while Kaelin's forced mark seared from without. Between them, her own magic, the dormant power of her mixed bloodline, began to stir. The sky darkened outside, though it was barely midday. The captured moonlight responded to her distress, swirling faster, brighter around them. As if summoned by her pain, storm clouds gathered over the palace, unnatural and sudden. "What are you?" Kaelin demanded, genuine fear flickering across his features as the ritual spiraled beyond his control. Her voice trembled as power surged through her veins. "I don't know." The moonlight contracted suddenly, wrapping around Auren like a protective cocoon. Through its silvery veil, she saw Kaelin stumble back, his ritual markings fading as ancient magic recognized a greater claim than his. As the echo faded, Auren collapsed to the stone floor, the potion's effects burning away under the onslaught of her awakening power. Miles away, she felt Dax stumble in the saddle as their bond flared to full strength again, distance no barrier to what had been forged between them. Her world tilted as the king stared down at her, understanding and rage warring in his expression. "It's him, isn't it?" he whispered, voice deadly quiet. "My brother." In the stillness that followed, with rain now lashing against the high windows and thunder cracking overhead, Auren knew the truth could no longer be hidden. Her soul answered the unspoken accusation, her wolf growling in confirmation. Something inside her shifted as she rose to her feet, the chains of her ceremonial dress suddenly weightless. The king might hold her captive, might command armies and territories, but he could not command her heart, nor the ancient magic that now stirred within her blood. "Yes," she admitted, her voice steady despite the danger. "My wolf chose your brother." Blood stained the throne room floor, not her own but the king's, dripping from his knuckles after he'd shattered the ancient oak table with a single blow. Lightning flashed through the stained glass windows, illuminating the sea of courtiers who had scattered to the edges of the vast chamber. No one dared approach the Alpha King in his rage, no one except Auren, who stood before him, chin raised despite the collar of silver now locked around her throat. "You think confessing your betrayal changes anything?" Kaelin snarled, his voice dropping to that dangerous octave where man and beast merged. The mate bond can be broken. It will be broken. 3 days had passed since her revelation in the sacred moon room. 3 days of confinement in chambers now stripped of comfort and guarded by priestesses immune to her newly awakening powers. 3 nights of dreams filled with Dax, his touch, his scent, his voice calling to her across the impossible distance between them. You can't break what was ordained by the moon herself, Auren replied, the words emerging with a certainty that didn't come from her alone. Something else spoke through her now, an ancient knowledge awakened during the failed ritual. The king's eyes flashed dangerously. Then explain why my brother isn't here fighting for you. Why he obeyed when I sent him to the border. He leaned closer, his breath hot against her face. Because he knows what I know, that the throne comes first. Always. Her heart skipped painfully at the mention of Dax, but Auren refused to show weakness. He went to protect me from your wrath. To give you time to accept what cannot be changed. Nothing is unchangeable, Kaelin hissed, gesturing sharply to someone behind her. Sarah emerged from the shadows, her normally composed features drawn with worry. In her hands, she carried an ornate box carved from bone, ancient symbols etched into its surface. When she opened it, a collective gasp rippled through the watching court. Inside lay a ceremonial dagger unlike any Auren had seen before. Its blade wasn't metal but crystallized moonlight, capturing and refracting the storm's glow. The handle appeared to be carved from the same material as the box, bone, but not from any creature Auren recognized. The severing blade, Sarah announced, her voice tight with poorly disguised horror. Not used in 3 generations of Veyrak rule. As though fate whispered warnings in her ear, Auren understood immediately. This was no ordinary weapon but a ritual tool designed for one purpose, to sever mate bonds forcibly. Her wolf surged forward, panic and rage intermingling as instinct screamed to flee. I won't ask your permission, Kaelin said, lifting the blade from its resting place. The bond will be broken, and then you will be properly bound to me, as was always intended. From there, everything happened with terrifying speed. Guards seized her arms while others cleared the massive center table. Courtiers pressed against the walls, faces alight with macabre fascination. None intervened, not even Sarah, who stood frozen, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. With every step he took closer, Auren felt the space between herself and death narrowing. Her body moved on instinct, struggling against the guard's grip, but the silver collar dampened her strength, prevented her wolf from emerging fully. Bring forth the blood bowl, Kaelin commanded, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. A priestess approached, carrying a basin carved from black stone. Ancient runes spiraled across its surface, pulsing with faint red light that seemed to beat in time with Auren's heart. Your bond will flow into this, the king explained, his tone almost conversational now that her restraint was assured. Then it will be destroyed, leaving you empty and ready for a proper claiming. Before either could speak further, the doors to the throne room burst open. Cold wind and rain whipped through the chamber as a figure strode in, drenched and mud-splattered, but unmistakable in his fury. Dax. The air thickened between them as their gazes locked across the crowded space. Despite the silver collar, despite the distance, Auren felt their bond pulse with renewed strength, stretching like a golden thread between their souls. Release her, Dax commanded, his voice deadly quiet as he approached the throne. Gone was the loyal younger brother, the dutiful prince. In his place stood an alpha in his own right, power rolling off him in waves that made the nearest courtiers step back instinctively. Kaelin's grip tightened on the severing blade. You dare return without orders? You dare challenge your king? I dare protect what's mine, Dax replied, each word precise and sharp as the blade Kaelin held. As is my right under laws older than your crown. For the first time, Auren noticed others entering behind Dax, warriors bearing the marks of northern border packs, traditionally loyal to the crown but now standing with the prince. The balance of power in the room shifted subtly as they spread out, positioning themselves strategically. The moment their eyes locked, Auren felt it, clear as day, the bond between them strengthening despite the silver collar, despite the magic meant to suppress it. With a single glance, Dax conveyed everything words couldn't, his fear for her, his determination, his absolute refusal to lose her. "The claiming law," Sarah suddenly announced, stepping forward to stand between the brothers. "He invokes the claiming law, my king. It cannot be denied." A growl rose in Kaelin's throat, rumbling through the vast chamber. "You would turn against me, brother? For a female?" "Not just any female," Dax replied, his gaze never leaving Auren's. "My mate. My soul." His voice dropped lower, meant for his brother alone. "I never asked for this. I never wanted to stand against you. But I cannot let you destroy what the moon herself has blessed." Silence roared as the two brothers faced each other, centuries of pack law and blood loyalty hanging in the balance. The court held its collective breath, witnesses to a confrontation that would reshape the kingdom regardless of its outcome. Her chest ached as she watched understanding dawn in Kaelin's eyes, not just anger now, but betrayal, loss, and beneath it all, a bone-deep fear that Auren suddenly recognized. The Alpha King wasn't merely fighting for a mate but for the salvation Sarah had mentioned. Without a Luna, his rule would crumble, the prophecy unfulfilled. "The claiming law demands trial by combat," Kaelin said finally, his voice hollow. "You understand what you're asking, brother? One of us will not survive." Dax's expression remained resolute, though Auren saw the flash of pain cross his features. "I understand." Suddenly, the wolves pressed forward within both males, alpha power clashing invisibly in the space between them. The very air crackled with tension as ancestral instincts older than civilization itself recognized the challenge for what it was, a fight to the death for mate rights. As the wind shifted through the broken doors, carrying Dax's scent to her, Auren's wolf surged with such force that the silver collar around her throat began to glow, struggling to contain her power. A growl rose from deep within her chest, not submission, but protective rage for her mate. Without another word, Kaelin nodded to the guards holding Auren. "Take her to the ceremonial grounds. The challenge will be answered at moonrise." What followed was a blur of motion and whispered instructions. The guards released her arms but kept the collar in place as they escorted her from the throne room. As she passed Dax, time seemed to slow. His hand brushed hers, brief, forbidden contact that nonetheless sent heat blazing through her veins. "I will come for you," he whispered, the promise burning between them. As fire bloomed beneath her skin at his touch, Auren felt something inside her shift. The dormant power that had awakened during the failed ritual now pulsed in time with her heartbeat, responding to Dax's presence. Whatever magic flowed in her veins, whatever heritage her mixed bloodline carried, it recognized its purpose now. The guards led her through corridors she hadn't seen before, descending deep beneath the palace to chambers carved from the living rock of the mountain itself. Ancient tapestries depicting wolf battles and moon rituals lined the walls, illuminated by torches that cast dancing shadows across their surface. Without warning, Sarah appeared beside her, keeping pace as they descended. "The claiming law is sacred," she explained in urgent whispers. "Even the king cannot deny it. But combat between royal brothers has not happened in 7 generations." "What aren't you telling me?" Auren asked, sensing the advisor's fear. Sarah's gaze darted to the guards before she leaned closer. "There is something about you, something beyond the mate bond that frightens the king. The way the moonlight responded to you in the sacred chamber." She hesitated. "There are prophecies about the moon bloodline, a female whose coming would either strengthen or destroy the Veyrak kingdom." The words struck Auren like physical blows. The moon bloodline. Why did that phrase resonate within her like a forgotten memory? As they reached a circular chamber deep beneath the palace, Sarah pressed something into Auren's palm, a small key fashioned from the same crystallized moonlight as the severing blade. "For the collar," Sarah whispered. "When the moment comes, you'll know when to use it." Before Auren could question further, the advisor was gone, melting into shadows as the heavy door swung shut. Alone in the ancient chamber, surrounded by symbols carved by ancestors whose names had long been forgotten, Auren clutched the key against her heart. In the stillness that followed, her thoughts spun with revelations and questions. The moon bloodline. The prophecy. The power awakening within her that seemed connected to both Dax and the moon itself. Her bones remembered something her mind could not, a heritage passed through blood rather than teaching. As the mark tingled where Dax had completed their bond, Auren realized that tonight's combat would determine more than just her fate or Dax's. It would decide the future of the entire kingdom. The wind carried her silent prayer through the mountain stone, across the palace grounds where two brothers prepared to fight to the death, to the moon slowly rising beyond storm clouds. Save him. Not herself, Dax. Because in the echo of her heartbeat, one truth emerged with crystal clarity: she would rather die than live in a world where he did not exist. Silver met flesh as Kaelin's claws raked across Dax's chest, drawing 5 perfect lines of crimson that gleamed in the merciless moonlight. The ceremonial grounds had become a battlefield, the ancient stone circle slick with the blood of royal brothers, while hundreds of pack members watched in hushed horror. Above them, the full moon hung impossibly large, bathing the scene in cold light that seemed to pulse with each blow exchanged. "Yield," Kaelin demanded, circling his wounded brother. His partial shift had transformed him into something monstrous, not fully wolf, not fully man, but a terrifying amalgamation of both. "Yield, and I may yet let you live." Dax rose to his feet with preternatural grace, blood streaming down his torso. His eyes had shifted to glacial blue, wolf eyes in a human face. "I cannot," he responded, voice rough with pain. "Not even for you, brother." From her place at the edge of the circle, chained to a ceremonial post with silver links that burned her skin, Auren watched the two most powerful males in the kingdom tear each other apart for the right to claim her. Her fingers closed around the moonlight key Sarah had given her, still hidden in the folds of her dress. Not yet. The moment hadn't come. What followed was violence so beautiful and terrible it stole her breath. The brothers moved like dancers in a lethal performance, each blow precise, each evasion calculated. They had trained together since childhood, had fought side by side in countless battles. They knew each other's weaknesses, anticipated each other's strategies. But Dax fought with the desperate strength of a wolf protecting its mate, while Kaelin fought with the cold precision of a king defending his crown. And that difference was beginning to show. As the sky darkened above them, storm clouds gathered despite the ritual's requirement for clear skies. Auren felt something shift in the atmosphere. The air grew heavy, charged with more than just the tension of combat. Ancient magic stirred, responding to blood spilled on consecrated ground. A growl rose in her throat as Dax stumbled, momentarily overcome by a blow to his knee. Kaelin pressed his advantage, claws extended for what might be a killing strike. In that horrifying moment, Auren's restraint shattered. "No." The scream tore from her throat, primal and raw. The silver chains around her wrists suddenly flared white-hot, responding to something awakening inside her. Both brothers froze mid-combat, heads turning toward her in unison. What they saw made even Kaelin step back in shock. The silver that had been meant to suppress Auren's power now conducted it instead, her entire body illuminated from within as if she'd swallowed the moon itself. With every heartbeat, the mysterious heritage Sarah had hinted at surged through her veins. The moon bloodline. Not a metaphor but a literal truth, her mother's bloodline carried moon magic so ancient it predated the first wolf shifters. As the tension broke around her, Auren slipped the crystalline key into the lock of her chains. The metal fell away, no longer able to contain what was emerging. When she stepped forward, the ground beneath her bare feet frosted over, white patterns spiraling outward with each step. "Enough," she commanded, her voice resonating with power that made the watching pack members drop to their knees. This ends now. Kaelin recovered first, anger overcoming his shock. The trial cannot be interrupted. Pack law demands. I am not subject to your pack law, Auren interrupted, the words coming from somewhere beyond conscious thought. I am Moonblood, last daughter of the line that blessed your ancestors with the ability to shift. Her gaze shifted to Dax, softening as she took in his wounds. And I will not watch my mate die for the right to claim what is already his. The wind shifted around them, carrying her scent, no longer just her own but something wilder, older, touched by magic that had been sleeping in her blood until this moment. The storm clouds above parted briefly, allowing a shaft of pure moonlight to illuminate her like a spotlight. Truth be told, Auren had never felt such clarity. The fragmented visions that had haunted her since childhood suddenly aligned into perfect understanding. Her mother's whispered bedtime stories about moon priestesses. Her wolf's unusual connection to the phases of the moon. The way silver burned yet strengthened her. Dax moved toward her, drawn by bonds stronger than loyalty or crown. Auren, he whispered, her name a prayer on his lips. A beat later, Kaelin roared with renewed fury, lunging not at his brother but at Auren. You cannot reject me. The prophecy. Before he could reach her, Dax intercepted, throwing himself between them. The brothers crashed to the ground, a tangle of claws and fangs. Blood sprayed across the ancient stones as Kaelin's claws found Dax's throat. Without thinking, Auren surged forward, hands outstretched. The moment her fingers touched Kaelin's back, moonlight erupted from her palms, not harming but revealing. Every memory, every emotion, every secret motivation in the king's heart was suddenly exposed, projected like silver shadows for all to witness. His desperation for the throne. His fear of the prophecy that claimed the Veyrak line would fall without a Moonblood mate. His genuine love for his brother, twisted by duty and ambition. His knowledge, from the beginning, that Auren was not truly his mate, but his desperate hope that royal will could override fate. As the echo faded from this revelation, Kaelin collapsed to his knees, the fight draining from him as his deepest truths were laid bare before his pack. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the harsh sound of his breathing. Meanwhile, Auren felt the space between her and Dax burn with recognition. She reached for him, fingertips brushing the blood from his wounds. Where she touched, silver light followed, knitting flesh, healing the damage his brother had inflicted. You knew, Dax said softly, blue eyes locked on his brother's defeated form. You knew she was mine from the moment you saw her, yet you claimed her anyway. Kaelin looked up, his expression stripped of royal hauteur, revealing the vulnerability beneath. The prophecy speaks of a Moonblood Luna who would save or destroy our kingdom. When I sensed what she was, He faltered. I couldn't risk her being bound to anyone but the crown. As though fate whispered explanation in her ear, Auren suddenly understood the terrible choice Kaelin had made. You thought that if I bonded with Dax instead of you, the kingdom would fall. Not a question but a statement of truth she somehow knew. 7 generations ago, a king's brother fell in love with a Moonblood female, Kaelin confirmed, his voice hollow. Their union nearly destroyed the Veyrak line. The scrolls warned that it must never happen again. In the quiet that followed, the implications of his confession settled over the gathered pack like fresh snow. The king had not acted from mere jealousy or possessiveness but from desperate fear for his kingdom's survival. Shadows danced between them as Auren moved to stand before Kaelin, her newfound power softening to compassion. The prophecy was misunderstood, she said gently. It's not about which brother claims the Moonblood female. It's about whether she is claimed by love or by force. The wind carried her words across the ceremonial grounds, where hundreds of pack members listened in stunned silence. Among them, Sarah stepped forward, ancient scrolls clutched in her hands. She speaks truth, the advisor confirmed. I found the original text in the Forbidden Archives. The prophecy warns against forcing a mate bond with a moonblood female. Such unions bring destruction, while bonds formed through true recognition bring strength. With every step he took closer, Dax emanated not triumph but compassion for his brother's pain. The kingdom doesn't need her bound to the crown, Kaelin. It needs her bound to her true mate, whoever that might be. Her wolf pressed forward as the truth of his words resonated through the ancient grounds. The power flowing through her veins responded not to Kaelin's royal status but to Dax's soul calling to her own. As the moonlight intensified around them, Auren felt her bones remember an oath taken generations before her birth, the original blessing her ancestors had bestowed upon the first shifters. Not one of dominance and possession, but of balance and choice. In that moment, standing between two brothers, one who had stolen her, one who had recognized her, Auren made her decision. With deliberate slowness, she extended her hand not to Kaelin but to Dax. "I choose," she said simply, her voice carrying across the silence. "As is my right by laws older than your kingdom." The moment their fingers touched, the storm clouds above parted completely. Moonlight bathed the ceremonial grounds in silver radiance so bright it was almost day. The watching pack gasped as ancient magic, dormant for generations, awakened in response to a true claiming. Her soul answered his as Dax drew her into his arms, their wolves howling in unison, not audibly but spiritually, a sound felt by every wolf present. The mate bond between them flared visible for an instant, a silver cord binding their hearts. "The choice is made," Sarah announced, her formal voice breaking the spell. "The claiming is witnessed." Still kneeling, Kaelin watched as the prophecy he had feared took an unexpected turn. His brother and the moonblood female stood wrapped in light that blessed rather than destroyed. In the stillness that followed, one certainty emerged: nothing would ever be the same. Because what had begun with theft was ending with choice. What had been twisted by fear was being straightened by truth. And as Auren leaned into Dax's embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against hers, she realized that sometimes being stolen could lead to being found, by the one who truly saw her. The crown hit the stone floor with a sound that echoed like thunder through the silent throne room. Kaelin stood before the assembled court, his face a mask of regal composure betrayed only by the slight tremor in his hands as he stepped away from the royal symbol he had just relinquished. Blood still stained his ceremonial robes from the combat, his own and his brother's mingled together as if to underscore the impossible choice he was making. "I, Kaelin Varak, rescind my claim to the throne of the Northern Territories," he announced, voice steady despite the collective gasp that swept through the stunned audience. "Let it be recorded that I do this not in defeat, but in recognition of a truth greater than my ambition." Auren watched from beside Dax, their fingers intertwined as moonlight continued to shimmer beneath her skin, a visible reminder of the heritage that had awakened hours earlier on the ceremonial grounds. The moonblood power flowing through her veins had not diminished with the night's passing; if anything, it had grown stronger, more controlled, as if returning to its rightful vessel after generations of dormancy. Yet despite that, her throat tightened with unexpected emotion as the Alpha King, no, former king, met her gaze across the crowded chamber. There was no hatred in his amber eyes, only a weary acceptance that made her heart ache with complicated sympathy. "The prophecy speaks truth," Kaelin continued, addressing not just the court but history itself. "A moonblood mate bound through force brings destruction. The moment I claimed Auren Thorne against her wolf's true recognition, I set our kingdom on a path to ruin." No matter how hard she tried, Auren couldn't look away from the proud wolf now humbling himself before his pack. This was not the arrogant alpha who had stormed her binding ceremony, who had marked her without consent. This was a leader recognizing his greatest error, and attempting to correct it before irreparable damage was done. "My brother's claim is true and just," Kaelin declared, gesturing toward Dax. "Their bond is blessed by ancient magic older than our line. It is not for kings to challenge what the moon herself has sanctioned." Whispers rippled through the assembled nobles and warriors. Some faces showed shock, others calculation, a few revealed relief. Standing near the dais, Sarah clutched ancient scrolls to her chest, tears streaming silently down her face, not from sorrow but from vindication. She had known all along what the prophecy truly meant. To make things worse, Kaelin wasn't finished. He approached Dax and Auren with measured steps that cost him visibly in dignity. When he stood before them, he did something no one in living memory had seen an Alpha King do. He bowed. "The throne is yours by right of combat and by blessing of the Moon bloodline," he said to Dax, the formal words clearly difficult for him to speak. "I ask only for the mercy of exile rather than execution for my transgressions against your mate." The silence stretched between the brothers, former rivals, former enemies, former king and subject. The weight of generations watched through the eyes of courtiers who would carry tales of this day to their grandchildren's grandchildren. After what seemed an eternity, Dax released Auren's hand and stepped forward. The space between them burned with unspoken history, childhood competitions, battlefield brotherhood, the invisible bond of shared blood that even a mate claim couldn't sever. "I reject your resignation," Dax said quietly, his voice nonetheless carrying to every corner of the hushed chamber. Confusion flickered across Kaelin's face. "What?" "I reject your resignation," Dax repeated more firmly. "The combat was for mate rights, not for crown rights. You remain king." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the court. Even Auren felt her breath catch at this unexpected turn. After everything Kaelin had done, the claiming, the attempted forced bonding, the combat that had nearly cost Dax his life, he was refusing the throne? Before anyone could question further, Dax retrieved the crown from where it had fallen. The ancient circle of silver and moonstone caught the light as he held it, not placing it on his own head but offering it back to his brother. "The kingdom needs continuity," Dax explained, his voice low but resonant with conviction. "It needs a leader who understands the cost of pride and the value of humility. You are that leader now, Kaelin. Not despite your mistakes, but because of them." As the echo faded from this pronouncement, Auren felt her perspective shift. The man she loved wasn't rejecting power out of weakness but claiming a different kind of strength, one that recognized when healing required sacrifice rather than supremacy. With every heartbeat, she understood more clearly why her wolf had chosen Dax over his brother. Not because one was stronger than the other, but because one recognized that true power came from choice rather than coercion. While the forest held its breath awaiting Kaelin's response, Auren stepped forward to stand beside her mate. The silver glow of her moonblood heritage illuminated the three of them in a private circle of light, separating them momentarily from the watching court. "There is another way," she said, her voice carrying ancient authority that silenced even the whispers. "One that honors both brothers and fulfills the prophecy's true intent." The air thickened around them as Auren extended her hands, one to each brother. "The prophecy doesn't demand that a moonblood female choose between royal brothers. It demands only that she choose freely." Something inside her shifted as ancestral knowledge flowed through her veins. The magic that had awakened during the combat now guided her words and actions, showing her a path that generations of misinterpreted prophecy had obscured. "Kaelin rules as king," she continued with growing certainty. "Dax stands as his warlord and heir. And I." She paused, searching for the right words. "I serve as Luna to the kingdom rather than to a single ruler, bound by love to one brother while bringing the moonblood blessing to all." As though the forest watched this unfold through unseen eyes, the atmosphere in the throne room changed. The tension that had stretched between the brothers for so long began to dissolve, replaced by something new, not the complete healing of wounds still fresh, but the beginning of a path toward reconciliation. Kaelin studied her face, searching for deception or manipulation and finding none. "You would still grant the kingdom the moonblood blessing? Despite what I did to you?" "The blessing was never yours to take or mine to withhold," Auren replied gently. "It belongs to the land and its people. I am merely its conduit." Her chest ached at the vulnerability that flickered briefly across the former king's features, a glimpse of the wolf beneath the crown, wounded and weary but not beyond redemption. Moments later, Dax placed the crown back on his brother's head with steady hands that spoke of forgiveness still in progress. "Rule wisely, brother," he said quietly. "Rule better than before." The tension broke when Kalen accepted the crown, his shoulders straightening beneath its familiar weight. "I will need advisors unafraid to speak truth to power," he said, a hint of his old authority returning to his voice. "You will have them," Dax promised, his hand finding Auren's again, their fingers intertwining. The bond between them pulsed visibly for an instant, silver light tracing the contours of their joined hands. The court erupted in murmurs as the implications of this unprecedented arrangement sank in. Not a deposition but a reformation. Not one brother triumphing over another, but a new balance of power guided by something older and wiser than conventional hierarchy. Beneath the moonlight streaming through the high windows, Auren stood between the brothers, no longer a possession to be claimed but a power in her own right. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin, not in challenge but in recognition of a path that honored both love and duty. "There will be those who resist this change," Sarah warned, approaching with scrolls still clutched to her chest. "The council, the elder alphas, they expect tradition, not innovation." "Then they will learn new traditions," Auren replied with quiet confidence. The moonblood power that had awakened within her responded to her resolve, silver light illuminating the ancient texts in Sarah's arms. Where once she had been a pawn in royal politics, she now stood as an equal partner in reshaping a kingdom. Where once she had been valued only for the power males believed they could extract from her, she now determined how that power would be used. That night, as the three of them sat in council for the first time, King, Warlord, and Luna, the foundations of a new order were laid in careful words and cautious trust. Not perfect. Not complete. But beginning. Hours later, when formalities ended and protocols were satisfied, Auren found herself alone with Dax for the first time since the combat. Their chambers, newly prepared in the east wing, far from the king's quarters, stood open to the night sky, balcony doors flung wide to admit the moonlight that now responded to her presence like a familiar friend. As if summoned by her thoughts, Dax emerged from the bathing chamber, torso still marked with healing wounds from the combat. He moved toward her with the fluid grace of a predator at ease, confident now in his claim yet still reverent in his approach. Her breath caught at the sight of him, not claiming but asking, not demanding but offering. This was the fundamental difference that her wolf had recognized from the beginning. One brother had sought to possess her. The other sought only to cherish her. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly, coming to stand before her at the balcony rail. "Choosing a solution that keeps him in power after everything he did?" Auren considered the question carefully, watching silver moonlight play across the muscle planes of his chest. "I don't regret creating a path where brothers don't have to destroy each other," she answered finally. "That's the destruction the prophecy truly warned against, the breaking of blood bonds for the sake of power." Her voice trembled as Dax's arms encircled her waist, drawing her against the solid warmth of his body. "Besides," she whispered against his skin, "I didn't choose him. I chose you. The rest is just governance." A growl of approval rumbled through his chest, vibrating against her palms as she traced the healing lines of combat. Their wolves pressed forward in unison, recognizing each other across the diminishing space between their human forms. "Mine," Dax murmured, the word both question and statement as his fingers tangled in her hair. "Yours," Auren confirmed, reaching up to trace the strong line of his jaw. "By choice, not by claim. By recognition, not by force." The space between them burned as months of forbidden longing culminated in this moment of perfect freedom. No more secrets. No more divided loyalties. No more impossible choices. As his lips finally claimed hers under the approving gaze of the moon, Auren surrendered to the knowledge that had guided her from the beginning. Some bonds transcended royal decrees, some connections defied political necessity, and some loves were written in the blood itself, ordained by forces older than kingdoms or crowns. She had been stolen by an alpha king but found by his brother. And in that finding, a kingdom would be reborn. She wore moonlight as her crown, woven into her midnight hair like liquid silver that caught and scattered radiance with each movement. 1 year had passed since the night that had changed everything, the combat, the awakening, the choice that had rewritten prophecy and reshaped an ancient kingdom. Standing at the edge of the sacred pool deep within the palace grounds, Auren Thorne was no longer the frightened female who had been stolen from her binding ceremony. Tonight, she would complete a different kind of union, one chosen freely, blessed by the very magic that flowed through her veins. "Are you certain?" Sarah asked, adjusting the translucent robe of ritual draped over Auren's shoulders. The advisor's once severe features had softened in the months since the new triumvirate had taken shape. "Once the moon blood binding is performed, there is no undoing it. Your souls will be twined beyond even death." Auren's smile held all the certainty of a woman who had found her place in a world that once sought to diminish her. "I've been certain since the moment his eyes found mine across a clearing filled with enemies." What followed was a procession unlike any the kingdom had witnessed in generations. From the sacred pool through torchlit gardens to the ancient heart tree at the center of the royal grounds, Auren walked a path strewn with white petals and blessed salts. Behind her came 12 priestesses, their voices raised in harmony that seemed to make the very air shimmer with anticipation. The forest held its breath as she approached the massive oak where hundreds of pack members waited in ceremonial formation. At the base of the tree stood 2 figures, brothers once divided by ambition, now united in purpose despite the scars that remained between them. King Kalen, resplendent in formal regalia that gleamed gold in the torchlight, inclined his head as she passed, respect where once there had been possession. The year had changed him, humbled him in ways that had ultimately strengthened both his rule and his character. The crown sat differently upon his brow now, not as a symbol of dominion but as a reminder of responsibility. And then there was Dax. As fire bloomed beneath her skin at the sight of him, Auren felt the bond between them pulse with recognition. Her wolf surged forward, eager after a separation of 3 days, the ritual requirement before a moonblood binding. He stood tall and powerful in ceremonial armor of midnight blue, the color of his house but also of the night they had first acknowledged their forbidden connection in the palace garden. The moment their eyes locked, time seemed to slow. His ice-blue gaze caught and held hers across the diminishing space between them, filled with a hunger that made her breath catch despite the hundreds of witnesses. This was no political arrangement, no strategic alliance. This was something primal and perfect, a connection that had defied a king's will and ancient prejudice to find its rightful culmination. With every step she took closer, the ground beneath her feet responded, small white flowers blossoming instantly in her footprints, a visible manifestation of the moonblood magic that had transformed the kingdom in the years since her awakening. The land itself recognized her now, responded to her emotions in ways that had initially frightened but now served as the foundation of a new prosperity spreading throughout the territories. Whispers rippled through the assembled crowd as Auren reached the heart tree. Many still regarded her with a mix of awe and residual wariness, the female who had broken tradition, who had refused to be a passive vessel for male ambition, who had instead carved a new path that honored choice over duty. Truth be told, the transition had not been seamless. There had been resistance from elder alphas, from traditionalists who believed females should submit rather than lead. There had been challenges to the unprecedented arrangement that placed her as Luna to the kingdom rather than merely to the king. Yet with each passing month, as harvests flourished and interpack conflicts diminished under the influence of her moonblood blessing, even the most stubborn detractors had begun to acknowledge that perhaps the prophecy had been fulfilled exactly as intended, not through destruction but through transformation. Standing before the heart tree now, with Dax's warmth mere inches away and the assembled pack watching in reverent silence, Auren felt the culmination of a journey that had begun in fear but would end in absolute certainty. The candidates for binding stand before the witness of Pack and Moon, intoned the high priestess, her ancient voice carrying across the hushed gathering. Who speaks for their worthiness? To everyone's surprise, it was Kalen who stepped forward. I stand as witness, he declared, his voice steady despite what this moment must cost him. I, who once sought to prevent this union through ignorance and pride, now bless it with clear eyes and humble heart. A murmur rippled through the crowd at this unprecedented act. For the king himself to stand as witness to his brother's binding, to the very female he had once claimed, spoke volumes about the healing that had gradually taken place. Without another word, Kaelin took Auren's right hand in Dax's left, joining them together before stepping back. The simple gesture carried more meaning than hours of formal speeches could have conveyed. It was acknowledgement. It was apology. It was release. As though fate demanded this next step, Dax and Auren turned to face each other fully. The high priestess approached with a ceremonial blade, not silver but crystallized moonlight, similar to the key that had freed Auren in her moment of greatest need. The moon blood binding requires truth above all else, the priestess explained, her gaze moving between them. Blood freely given, words freely spoken, souls freely joined. With his scent in the air surrounding her, Auren held out her palm without hesitation. The blade's touch was cool rather than painful, drawing a thin line of blood that gleamed with unusual brightness in the torchlight. Beside her, Dax did the same, his expression solemn yet filled with barely contained emotion. When their bleeding palms pressed together, the reaction was immediate and far more dramatic than during their first blood exchange. Moonlight erupted around them, not just from Auren but from Dax as well, as if her heritage had somehow awakened something complementary in him. The light spiraled upward, climbing the ancient heart tree until every leaf gleamed silver. "I choose you," Auren vowed, the ritual words carrying the weight of absolute truth. Not as subject to ruler, not as female to male, but as equal to equal, soul to soul. "I choose you," Dax responded, his voice rough with emotion. Not through right of claim or combat, but through recognition of what has always been meant to be. As the echo faded from their exchange, something unprecedented occurred. The heart tree, dormant for generations except for ceremonial flowering, suddenly burst into bloom, white blossoms unfurling in waves that cascaded from highest branches to lowest roots. Petals showered down upon the assembled pack, who gasped in collective wonder at the sight. Between them, something cracked open, not just the expected strengthening of their mate bond, but something deeper and more ancient. Through their joined blood, visions flowed between them, children with Dax's ice-blue eyes and Auren's midnight hair, a kingdom flourishing under the combined strength of brothers who had learned to rule together rather than in opposition, generations of peace spreading outward from the choices made in this moment. Her world tilted as Dax drew her closer, their joined hands pressed between their hearts. "Mine," he whispered, the word both possession and offering. "Yours," she confirmed. "By choice. By love. By destiny rewritten." The space between them burned as Dax's lips claimed hers, sealing their vows with a kiss that sent another wave of moonlight rippling outward from where they stood. The pack erupted in howls of approval, wolves shifting spontaneously in response to the ancient magic awakened in their midst. As they separated, breathless and illuminated in the shower of blossoms, Auren caught sight of Kaelin watching from the edge of the clearing. No resentment darkened his features now, only a complicated acceptance. When he inclined his head in acknowledgement, she returned the gesture with genuine respect. They would never be friends, perhaps, but they had found a balance that served something greater than personal desire. That night, while celebration roared through the palace and forests beyond, Dax led Auren to a place she had never seen, a hidden clearing high in the mountains overlooking the kingdom. A small cabin stood nestled among ancient pines, built by his own hands during the months of their courtship. "Our place," he explained simply. "Where we are neither warlord nor Luna, but simply mates." The air thickened around them as they crossed the threshold, leaving titles and responsibilities behind. Here in this private sanctuary, with moonlight streaming through windows positioned to catch its glow, they could finally complete what had begun a year ago with forbidden glances and secret meetings. With every heartbeat, the moon blood binding strengthened, creating something new between them, not just the spiritual connection of true mates, but a sharing of power and purpose that transcended ordinary bonds. As clothing fell away and skin met skin, silver light traced patterns across their bodies like living tattoos, marking the completion of ancient magic. "I have wanted this," Dax confessed against her throat, his voice dropping to that register that made her wolf whine with need, since the moment I first caught your scent miles from the ceremony. Even then, my soul knew yours. Her fingers mapped the scars across his chest, some from battles fought for the kingdom, others from the combat with his brother that had nearly claimed his life. Each mark told a story of the path that had led them here, to this perfect joining that had once seemed impossible. As the night deepened around them, their wolves emerged fully, not in physical shift but in spiritual presence, dancing together in the space created by their union. Silver and midnight blue, female and male, moonblood and warrior, two halves of something ancient and new all at once. With a single glance, Dax conveyed everything words couldn't capture: devotion, protection, partnership, and a love so profound it had rewritten prophecy itself. As their bodies joined in the most primal dance, the cabin filled with moonlight so brilliant it seemed to erase the boundaries between them completely. In the stillness that followed their union, with Dax's heart beating steady beneath her cheek and the moonblood binding pulsing between them like a living thing, Auren reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She had been stolen, yes, taken against her will from everything familiar. But in that theft, she had discovered truths about herself that might otherwise have remained dormant forever. Her bones remembered the frightened female she had once been, the one who had accepted limitations placed upon her by others. That female was gone now, transformed not just by magic but by the courage to choose her own destiny. "What are you thinking?" Dax murmured against her hair, his arms tightening possessively around her. Auren smiled, tracing patterns of light across his skin. "That sometimes," she whispered, "being stolen can lead to being found." Outside their sanctuary, a kingdom slept peacefully under the watch of newly balanced powers. Inside, wrapped in moonlight and each other, a warlord and his moonblood mate began writing the next chapter of a story that would be told for generations, of how a female claimed by one brother but destined for another had healed ancient wounds and fulfilled a prophecy not through destruction but through love. She had been stolen by the Alpha King, desired by his brother, and in choosing freely between duty and destiny, had transformed them all. The mark on Auren Vale's shoulder burned like liquid fire whenever he was near, a constant reminder of everything she'd lost, and everything he'd forgotten. She could feel it now.